Well, hello there. I didn't see you come in. Make yourself at home. Have a drink. While I give some attention to some underappreciated characters and storylines that I personally love. And I hope you grow to love as well.
Hey there, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Matt's Minis Hellblazer. Today, we're reading Hellblazer number 10. And this one is a pretty fun one. I enjoyed it a lot. So if you don't remember what happened last time, just a little catch up. Basically, John had a really bad couple of days where he was all depressed because Zed had gotten taken, and he thought he was beat because he was now like corrupted by demon blood from Nergal giving him an infusion. And then he got a plan all of a sudden, and that plan was to go to find Zed, which I can't remember where the city she was in, but he knows where she went, where she was taken by the tongues of fire. And he goes to the compound where she was at, and he sneaks in, and he finds her like walking the grounds. They go have sex, so he defiles her body without her knowing it with his demon tainted seed. And then after that, he proceeds to go back to London. And when he gets back to his flat, he is smoking a cigarette, and he's coming up with an actual plan that can kind of defeat Nergal's plan, besides just defiling Zed, and because that's like on the demon side, right? The demon wanted him to do that, so he's trying to figure out how to screw both parties. He's trying to figure out how to screw the Tongues of Fire and the Resurrection Crusaders, while also being able to screw over Nergal and that whole demon side. So he's coming up with a plan, and he tells Swamp Thing, "I have a plan," and that's where that issue ended. But if you have been listening to Matt's Mini Swamp Thing, you would know that the next issue is actually continued, or the storyline, I guess, is continued in Swamp Thing. And in that storyline, basically, Swamp Thing takes over John's body the second after this issue ends, like literally forces himself into John's body, and then proceeds to take his body back to the swamp, where he can then use John's body to impregnate Abby. And she was not okay with that at first, but she goes along with it because she wants to have a baby with Swamp Thing so much. So that is what's going on in the background, because that kind of comes into the end of this issue. But first things first, we see the cover here is a very weird kind of cryptic cover. It's all red, completely red, and there's like eyeballs floating all over the place, and there's like a demon hand, and there's like maybe a handshake and some weird shit. I don't know. There's kind of like esoteric covers that this series has, but it's a cool cover. And we see on the first page, we get an artistic vision of what I think is a representation of souls, maybe, but it looks a lot like semen, being shot into the ether or whatever. So it looks like that, but we see Constantine's soul, I'm assuming, being thrust out into the nether realms, the astral realm, and he is screaming and flying. He looks like a little baby, but he's got a giant Constantine head on him, which is kind of funny. And his like body's inside of this embryonic sac, maybe, that looks like it's got a tail, so it kind of looks like a sperm. And that's supposed to represent the astral body being shot out because Swamp Thing took over his body. So, and we see the issue is called Sex and Death. It is written by Jamie Delano. The art this time is by Richard Piers Rayner, and the inks are by Mark Buckingham. So Constantine's little baby body gets shot out of his embryonic sac, and it flies into the open. So he's now soaring above London, and he's like, "Oh, cool, this is pretty awesome." He's pretty like literally, he's like Ghost Dad or some shit. He's just flying around, and he goes to a bunch of places he's seen before, but like not from this point of view, like this floating around point of view. He checks out all of his neighbors, which is a nice touch, because in the Swamp Thing issue, Swamp Thing in Constantine's body also talks to all his neighbors and says like, "Oh, they're really nice people." So we get to know kind of the people that live in the flat around Constantine's. And so he's flying around after he looks at what they're doing. And it's kind of like he hasn't fully grasped how to fly and whatnot. He kind of goes through the earth and down into the subway tunnels where he almost gets hit by a train. And as that happens, he kind of like remembers the swamp. He's like, oh, Swamp Thing, Christ, the big green bastards killed me. So he thinks that Swamp Thing actually killed him and that he's like out of his body because of that. But then he kind of assesses his situation and realizes, wait, I'm in the astral dimensions. I'm not dead. So he didn't kill me. He just ripped off my body and fired me into the ethereal realm like he was tossing out the garbage. And he has some funny lines on this page as he's going through, now that he's realized he's in the astral plane. He's kind of watching all these, like, we'll say they're like monks or something, or people doing yoga and meditation and stuff. So he's like just hanging out, watching people do that stuff in the astral world. So he says, it's not even as if I wasn't going to offer. I thought I would do the great green Gilbert a favor, a civilized agreement between gentlemen like, and lend him my perfect body so he can indulge in a bit of rumpy-pumpy with his girlfriend, and he gets to plant his sprout elemental in fertile earth, as it were. So the prophecy gets fulfilled, the resurrection crusade gets stopped, and the demon gets it in the air. And I get the credit, and Abby gets pregnant. And so he's basically like, I mean, this was going to work out great. I'm going to screw everybody, literally and figuratively. And I get to be the good guy in both situations because I'm helping heaven and not helping hell, and I'm helping Swamp Thing have a baby. And then also, I'm fulfilling the prophecy of a child being born with supernatural means, and that fulfills the prophecy. So as he's thinking about this, he's like, you know what? I'm going to go over and see what's going on with Zed over in Glastonbury. That's the name of that city. And so he goes and he actually's like, you know what? I'll just use some dream logic since I'm in the astral plane, and I'll hop on an actual astral plane. So he actually imagines and conjures up an actual plane and jumps on it, and it looks like an old World War I biplane. And he goes and flies over to Glastonbury, where there's like a literal tunnel opening up that he can see because it's in the astral plane from heaven directly down to their the Tongues of Fire temple or whatever. So we got to that temple, and Zed is ready for her wedding day, we'll call it. She has been made ready and is prepared to be the new Mary. So she is supposed to meet with a heavenly host and get pregnant without having sex, I guess, or at least with having sex with an angel. And that will get her pregnant by supernatural means, and a new Jesus or God or whatever will be born on earth. And so the Tongues of Fire are very excited. They're like, this is the place of the prophecy. It's happening. And they bring her into the vortex area, and they're like, this is the Mary. And they're like, okay, waiting for the angels to come down. And the narrator says, the holy entourage descends, and the angelic lover approaches, touching her with joy, bathing her in unbearable ecstasy, moving to consume her and fill her with gorgeous light. But as the glory lays up against her soul, a ghastly mouth of dread sucks at her happiness, and the angel convulses, squirms in elastic contraction of loathing. She feels its revulsion wrenched by the spasms of disgust. It chokes and thrashes, panicking to withdraw, as if from poison or a rotten blight of hell. So basically, the angel turns from her because she has been corrupted by John Constantine's demon seed. And the whole like console and everything like erupts, and this whirlwind kind of sucks everything into it, and all these people, I assume, die. They all get sucked into this vortex. Not everybody from the Tongues of Fire, but a lot of the people. The narration continues. There is a sound as if the universe growled with anger. There is a cataclysm and death. And then we see Constantine narrate as he's watching this. Destruction casts fractured shards of reality across dimensions. I am the terrorist who planned the bomb. I spit in the eye of God and laugh in the face of hell. So yeah, he's just very happy that all this happened. And then he says, for seconds, Calamity is at an end itself. Then I see a spy and remember the demon and the plan. So the demon, Nergal, has sent a spy into the area in the astral plane, just like John is sitting there. And this dude's got some demon hands that kind of look like Gumby or some shit, like hanging off the back of him. What is it, like Stretch Armstrong or whatever? So this, I think it's the actual serial killer from issue 4 is the guy, because he's got Damnation Army carved into his chest. And both of them are watching what's going on with Zed. And Zed is in a very bad place because, she just got rejected by God. And she's very, very, very sad. And she's crying, but, the whole building's falling apart around her. So it says, she prays for the world to swallow her shame, to bury her deep with no monument, to grind her vile flesh and bone into paste. But God is just and justice is cruel. And Constantine, watching this, kind of begins to feel bad. And he's like, you did this, Constantine. You killed her, condemned her to insane death like all these sorry bastards. And he's seeing like all these souls leave the temple because all of those are all the people that got sucked into the vortex, I'm assuming. And he says, done now, though, had to be. Humanity would have become the slaves of heaven. Didn't really have any choice, did I? And Constantine is, pretty astounded by how much of like a mess was actually caused by that. He just figured the angel would, be like, oh, no, I don't want her, and fly away or whatever. So he was like, oh, shit, a lot of people died and stuff happened. So he sees the spy being reeled back into hell by Nergal, I guess. And he's like, hey, maybe I can follow that guy out of this astral plane. So he begins to follow that body or whatever being dragged by Nergal. And when Nergal gets the body back or the astral plane dude, he's like super happy. He's like, oh man, listen, you can hear heaven wailing in the firmament. And it sounds so great to hear angels crying out loud and all this stuff. And he even goes on to say like, Constantine was the ideal weapon, cunning, resourceful, but stupid. Trying to outwit me, he served me nonetheless. And then all of a sudden, one of his followers in this like hell dimension is like, and like crying out. And he's like, what? And it turns out this thing is like in the green, or it's connected to the earth somehow. And he's like, something's happening in the green. And he talks to it and he finds out what's going on. And he's like, Constantine, you have betrayed me. The Swamp Thing mates. The prophecy is fulfilled through you. And then he looks and he's like, I know you're out there. I can smell you. You cannot know what you have done, what torments you have claimed by this. For you, an eternity of agony and fear begins now. And he like rips open his chest and these dogs fly out of his chest. I guess they're like hellhounds or whatever. And they start chasing Constantine in the astral plane and then begin to chase him around the world, and with Nergal following behind. So Constantine's running, or I should say flying around because he's still in the astral plane. And he's like, I'll never outrun them, but maybe they can't swim, or maybe they can't get my scent if I'm swimming. So he like goes under the water, but then Nergal just becomes a giant whale and tries to swallow him up. But then Constantine's like, how do I fight a whale? And, just like that plane he conjures up, he's like, oh, I can like make a Moby Dick ship and like shoot harpoons at this whale. So he begins to try to fight the whale, but it's just kind of like silly because, he's in the astral plane. It's not real. So he's like, oh, this isn't going to work. So he's like, wait a second. Since the Swamp Thing's got my mortal remains, it's got to be worth a shot. The demon could never follow me into the green. So he's like, okay, I'm going to go into the green. And his plan is if he can keep going deep enough, he says, yes, just up ahead. Have to turf the old moss back out of my body and let him see the demon off. So he's going to force Swamp Thing out of his body and him back into his body. So as he's getting closer, he's like, oh, Christ, would you believe it? They're still going at it. He's like, too late to stop now, though. And he like switches and his body, he gets back into his body and he's like, And then Abby's like, Alec, are you okay, love? And he's like, oh, dear. Look, I'm not sure how to tell you this, darling, but I'm not him anymore. I'm me. And I'm sorry. She freaks the fuck out. She's like, I knew it. I knew you tricked me. So she gets freaked out because she thinks Constantine tricked her. But he's like, no, you don't understand. There's this whole thing. And there's like a demon chasing me. And I had to get help. And that's the problem. And she puts the blanket over her and just begins to walk into the swamp water. And he's like trying to explain to her, but he puts on his clothes. And as he's like putting on his pants, Swamp Thing comes up behind him and says, "Constantine." And he's like, "Oh, look, I tried to tell her, but she was a bit upset." And he's like, "Yes, you should go now. We have no further business." And he's going to walk into the swamp with Abby and like kind of try to comfort her after she just got in this very awkward situation with Constantine. And he's like, "Hey, what'd you do about that demon? I hope you mangled him." And Swamp Thing's like, "He did not wish to fight. He feared me. He said that you should tremble till he choose his hour. He said, remember Newcastle." And Constantine's like, "Newcastle? Did he say that?" So now John is back in London. He flies all the way there, and it says, "Remember Newcastle?" "I do. And it fills my mind from Louisiana to London." So basically, if you remember, Newcastle is like the secret origin history of John Constantine. We don't quite know what happened. They did explain that there was some kind of demon possession and some kind of fuck up that he did because he was young and it had all his friends killed and a girl died or something. So we're not sure exactly, but that's what he is now kind of remembering, and it's just really like getting to him. And the narration's saying what he's feeling. He says it feels like a sudden chill of anger which now grows tentacles through him like cancer or death. Remember Newcastle. I wouldn't have given him credit for such subtlety, but these two words touch me as precisely as a dentist steel probing the exposed pulp of a molar nerve. So really gets to the heart of Constantine there. And as he walks into his apartment, he's like, "What the heck? The lights aren't working. The bulb must be off." And he says like, "Oh, Miss M, it's only me. Don't worry." And he flicks his lighter on. And as he does, he sees everybody that we saw at the beginning, all his nice flatmates, are all now arranged in a horrific scene of gore and death where they are, put through spikes and their heads are ripped off and they're hanging upside down and bodies everywhere and guts strewn from the ceiling. And Constantine narrates, with absolutely no warning, "I'm tottering on the edge of the abyss. Nausea hauls itself lumbering from my bowels and roars." And Constantine has a revelation. He's like, "Wait a second. This guy is playing with me. He spelled it out. He boasted. How did I not see this before?" And he's like, "Nergal, Nergal, Nergal. I know you now, you bastard." And he goes up to his room and he finds a file, and that file has a name on it, and the name is Newcastle 1978. So apparently Nergal has something to do with Newcastle and all that horror that happened in Constantine's life back in the day. So we see the next issue is called Newcastle. If you want to find out what happens with Swamp Thing, right after this issue, it is kind of followed up in issue 77 of Swamp Thing. So go check out that episode of Matt's Minis. And if you have any comments, questions, or suggestions, you can email me at planestrains and comicbooks, all one word, at gmail.com. And we will see you on the next one.